Looks like we got some people coming in. All right, welcome everybody. It is 8 o'clock. We are going to honor everybody's time and get started. Welcome to the Science of Learning webinar. We are partnering with Frederick County Public Schools. Specifically, we are working tonight with Maureen Corio and Tammy Sander, who are part of the Employee Induction and Professional Learning Department up here in Frederick County. Frederick County has been partnering with the CTTL, the Center for Transformative Teaching and Learning. And we've been doing a lot of study in mind-brain education. And tonight, Tammy and Maureen are going to be talking about how we can reduce cognitive load through the use of some technology tools. So we're very excited to have them with us tonight. And so without any further ado, we're going to turn it over to Tammy and Maureen and start sharing our screens now.
Okay. Hi, everybody, and thank you so much for being here. A quick special shout out to Brandy and Tony and even Erica tonight, who have invited us and helped set this all up for us. Tammy and I are honored and excited to learn with you tonight. We've heard that these webinars are sometimes referred to as speed learning. And when we think about all we know about MBE and want to share with you, but then only 30 minutes, I can pretty much promise this is going to be some more speed learning. So I'll apologize for that ahead of time. Because of that, we have created a retrieval guide, and that's just designed to help you process your information. It's kind of like a note catching sheet. I think some of you may have received that ahead of time with one of the reminders about tonight. If not, maybe Tony or Tammy or somebody can drop that retrieval guide, a link to that. It's a Google Doc in the chat. So as Tony said, in Frederick County, we've been on this MBE journey for almost a decade now, but really intensely the last 5 years or so. We've infused our growing understanding of mind-brain education into our curriculum, induction programming, and with our systemic coursework. And a lot of our professional learning, we have book studies and MSDE courses on mind-brain education. So, what is mind-brain education? What is it all about? MBE, we call it MBE, mind-brain education. Sometimes it's referred to as the learning sciences or the science of learning. And in a nutshell, it's the funneling of three fields. It's cognitive neuroscience, psychology, and education. And they all kind of come together and help us to answer the question is, how do we learn best? So that means we need to be informed about the brain and how the brain works. How are memories formed in our brains? And then how are they stored? And most importantly, we think is then how can we retrieve them, right? How can you retrieve those memories? So what makes that information what we call sticky? What makes it stick and then move into long-term memory? The answer to this question, how do we learn best, is answered in a variety of ways, and that's using research-informed strategies that can be used and taught to learners of all ages. So we're talking not just one set of people or not just teachers, but learners of all ages. We want to begin, we're going to use the chat here, and we want to invite you to let us know where you're from by using the acronym of the school system you work with or where you're coming from this evening. And then share with us a number 1 to 5 and let that number tell us how familiar you are with MBE. So 1 would be, you've heard of it, but you don't know a whole lot about it. And that's maybe why you're here tonight, which is great. Or maybe you're a 5, and that means you're really familiar with it. Maybe you've even coached other people, and Brandy and Tony are going to get your name before the night's over to do the next series, right? So again, acronym of where you're from, and then a number 1 to 5.
We already have some 3s and 4s showing up.
I love to see all the different places everyone's coming from. See a lot of people from FCPS, yay. Thank you all for sharing that. That gives us an idea of who all's here tonight too. So thanks so much for that. So there are many topics that fall under the umbrella of mind-brain education. And I'm thinking of things like multiple modalities, interleaving, spacing, retrieval practice, forming memories, providing feedback, metacognition, so many more. And again, we only have 30 minutes, so we've selected just a few to share with you. But before we even get to those, we just want to share with you 3 principles of mind-brain education that we think all teachers should know. So the first is this concept of neuroplasticity. This is that idea that our brains are able to change and grow throughout our entire life. That means that we as educators need to think of ourselves as brain changers. So you're a brain changer now, whether you knew that or not. And it means we're constantly embracing that growth mindset. The second principle is that there's a very strong link between emotion and cognition. I mean, I think just a few decades ago, maybe when I did my undergraduate in the dark ages, they pretty much told us you check your emotions at the door, students and teachers. And we now know through research and mind-brain education that that's just not the case, that there's a huge link between emotion and cognition. Oh, I don't know what happened. Sorry about that. Somehow lost my screen. Is it back? Are we back?
There it is.
The third one, the third principle, I'm sorry about that, is that there is all new learning connects with prior learning. So I'd like you to take just a minute and think about these 3 principles and think about the last 2 years of the pandemic. Think of yourself, but not just yourself, the teacher or educator, but think of yourself as a learner too. I think it's safe to say that all teachers had to learn new practices and new tools during this time, right? Our neuroplastic brains were learning new structures, new tech tools, and we were even learning a lot of new things about ourselves and our students. Add into all of that new learning, that second principle. Want to talk about emotions in the last 2 years? Just kind of crazy, right? And we need to be aware that the students were not checking those emotions at the door. They bring their entire brain with them to every new learning experience. They're not a blank slate. They're not empty pails, right? So during the last 2 years, we've had remote learning, hybrid learning, concurrent learning, you name it. And then we returned face-to-face, but with masks and social distancing and other new practices in place, right? And teachers were dealing with all different types of emotion, their own, the students, the parents of their students. They were balancing stress. They were acknowledging fear, their own fear at times, students' fear, parents' fear of sending their kids to school at this time. They had to find a way to encourage that growth mindset every single day. They were finding ways to motivate students and maybe themselves and engage the students in new ways because of all this new learning, right? All while undergoing new learning and new strategies and frequent changes. So this third principle, this is not really something new. I think we all know that new learning connects to prior learning, and when we can make those connections, the new learning's better, right? But with the mind-brain education behind it now, we now know that that new information is so much more readily learned when we can make all of those connections. And so it behooves us as educators to find ways to build prior knowledge, to activate their prior knowledge, to introduce some things to them to build that foundation so that new learning can take place. So again, I ask you to kind of think about these last 2 years and yourself as a learner, and think of all that learning that took place. Everything that you went through was in some way connected to what we already knew. All those good teaching practices you already knew. So for example, pre-pandemic, we knew how important it was to greet kids at the door of our classroom every day. We were building relationships. We were trying to get a feel of how they were doing. I always like to try to get the pulse on the classroom, see what's going on. I mean, I taught middle school in that class right after lunch. It was very important for me to greet those kids at the door and find out what's going on, what came down at lunchtime, right? And then we move into virtual learning and emotions are a little more rampant, but we knew still that building relationships was important. And during the pandemic, we saw teachers incorporating a variety, all different type of digital tools and practices to still build those relationships, to greet students at the start of a Google Meet or a Zoom call, right? They were doing virtual check-ins, the beginning of class, the end of class, sometimes in the middle of class to check for understanding because kids were working independently. They used these newly learned digital tools to do things that they knew were very important from their prior knowledge.
So our purpose tonight is to affirm and synthesize how we are using MBE and technology to increase student learning. Stop and think of the tech tools that you're already using with students, with adult learners. Just take a minute to think about that. Think about why you use those particular tools. Now take a look at this basic formula for learning from mind-brain education. Attention plus memory equals learning. Connect your reasons why you choose specific technology to this formula. Can you go backwards and get that?
I'm sorry.
Back up. Nope, that's all good. Okay. So do you use certain tech tools to capture and retain student attention and engagement? I know I do. Do you use certain tools to build fluency or enhance memory or help students review and retain information? Absolutely, there's a lot of that out there. Do you use certain programs knowing that students' prior knowledge will be used to build a personalized schedule of topics and tools? So making these decisions deliberately and with the brain in mind will help you better stay in the juncture of where MBE and technology meet. So tonight we will be looking closely at how we intentionally use technology with our growing understanding of MBE to increase our impact and make us more effective. So our learning goal for tonight, in addition to introducing you to MBE, is analyzing ways to use technology to support cognitive load theory. In our next session, which is going to be happening on March 9th, we will be taking a look at how technology supports the mindset of belonging, which is another really big topic in mind-brain education, especially post-pandemic and during the pandemic, and also retrieval practice. So let's take a look then at cognitive load theory. See, in the book, The Science of Learning, and that is by Edward Watson and Bradley Bush, cognitive load theory highlights how working memory is limited. And if it is overloaded, then the transfer of information from working memory, which only holds so much, to long-term memory, which is kind of limitless from what we know at this point, is hindered. So there are three pieces to understanding cognitive load theory. Now, we have all been overwhelmed with too much information, distraction, trying to process what we have learned. Intrinsic load is the cognitive space it takes to achieve the learning goal, to complete the learning task. As educators, we need to recognize that intrinsic load will be different for different learners. And we should try to lighten intrinsic load when possible. Think scaffolding or chunking or providing worked examples. To lighten your intrinsic load this evening, we are giving you some foundational knowledge about MBE before discussing how technology supports it. We gave you relevant examples of MBE ideas when we explained the three big ideas to you. So those are all ways that we're already kind of reducing your intrinsic load. Extraneous load is the cognitive space used by the environment. And this has been big during the pandemic. We reduce the extraneous load we can control, because not all extraneous load can be controlled, but we reduced it by limiting the number of words on our slides. We also reduced it by trying really hard to speak slowly. And that's really difficult for me. But those are all different things that we can do to help reduce that extraneous load. Another thing that we have to recognize is that extraneous load is also different for different learners. We have all had students who seem to be kind of distracted by everything. A light buzzing overhead, or a fly in the room, or something going on outside the window. We've all had those students, but we've also had students who seem to be in a flow of some sort where anything can be happening around them, but they are still completely focused on their task. So think about extraneous load in terms of what you can control and how different it is for each learner. Germane load is the cognitive space used to move information from the working memory, and remember that's limited, to the long-term memory. By dual coding some words and illustrations together tonight, we will give your brain multiple opportunities to process information, thereby making it easier for you to take that working memory stuff and put it into your long-term memory. You're able to then recall the visual and the words together.
So in order to help you manage some cognitive load, we're going to provide this visual image. This is an example of an MBE strategy called dual coding. We use multiple modalities, both visual and text, but notice they're together on one slide. It's not like you're switching between two slides. The information is kind of clean and simple and right there for you. I'm going to go ahead and give you a few moments just to look that over and think about that in addition to everything Tammy just shared with us about cognitive load. We really love this image because it really shows us that there's a limited amount of space for cognitive load in our brain. And we have to make room for all three. You know, all three are a reality. They all three exist and they all have their part. But as teachers, as educators, we really want to maximize the amount of space that remains for germane load, for that deep processing and forming schema in our brain to form. So that means we need to do whatever we can to reduce extraneous load. And we know that could look different for different kids. You all have had students who, anybody that walks down the hallway and your door's open, it's totally going to distract them. Other kids don't even notice that happening. So it's not the same for every kid, but we just need to be aware of it and do what we can to minimize it. And then simplifying intrinsic load. And that's where we're going to focus some of our thoughts for this evening. Okay. And so while a lot of these things we've told you, you might already know that. You already know those three principles. I know about cognitive load, and that's fantastic. That's great. You're well on your way to becoming a great MBE practitioner. But the important thing is that you got to put that into action. We've got to deliberately and purposefully engage these ideas into our planning ideas and into our words, encouraging students. And I think the students are the most important thing here. We need to be very transparent and tell them why we're doing what we're doing, how their brain works. And in doing these things, we teach them how to learn. So we now want to give you a chance to kind of share some ideas using the chat again. We talked about how can we work with intrinsic load, how can we minimize it? So we're going to break down this idea of cognitive load into a few different strategies. And we want you to think about what kind of tech tools could actually do these things. Keep in mind that we want to maximize the opportunities for students to process the information they're learning. And that means we've got to minimize distractions and extraneous items, and that would include stress. So think about minimizing stress. That would be reducing extraneous load. And that could be stress related to the learning and maybe not related to the learning. We also want to simplify the instruction and information, and that could look different for different kids too. And that just makes the processing of information a little easier. So for example, if you have a task that is just going to take too long, to reduce that intrinsic load, we would want to break it down to have shorter deadlines. If you could please drop in the chat some tech tools that you use maybe already, or you're thinking now, oh, I could use this, that would break down a big task to have shorter deadlines. I'm seeing some good ones, Flipgrid, Trello. I love just developing playlists with checkpoints. The checkpoints are really important.
And many of you are able to do that within your LMS. Many of you are able to do it with things like completion rules.
Someone just put that. That's Anne. Thank you, Anne. Woohoo. I also want to remind you that anytime you can break down a task into multiple deadlines, you're increasing the opportunity for those feedback loops. And, the more opportunities for feedback loops, the greater that end product's going to be, the stronger their learning is going to be. So if you can think of some tech tools that encourage and are great for feedback loops, you can drop those in too.
Somebody already put Flipgrid in here. Oh, Anne, you and I are like on the same wavelength tonight.
Yeah.
Hey, Maureen and Tammy, we've got a question in the Q&A section about examples of how to reduce extraneous load in face-to-face classroom settings. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Okay, I do. I don't want to go too far off script, but we could talk all night on that. But the first things I'm thinking of are things like close that classroom door. Things that you might not even think about. I had a student once tell me they couldn't think during a test because the light was buzzing. I never even heard the light buzzing until, of course, he said it. Then I couldn't stop hearing it. And then, believe it or not, just the amount of stuff you have around your classroom. I think 10 years ago, the more stuff you had, the better. And now it's not that way anymore. You want to keep a nice, clean classroom, clearly post your expectations, your objectives, have a place for everything and everything in its place. My father would be proud of me for saying that. Labeling things, just kind of keeping it clean and neat so they're not super distracted. I know when I go into a classroom, if there's stuff everywhere, I'm distracted. I want to read every poster in the classroom. Little things
Also,
like that.
Students who are working independently may need some like noise canceling headphones. Sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes some preferential seating is helpful. That way maybe their back is to the door where they would be looking out, or their back is to the window. But you have to have a relationship with that student in order to really make sure that you're doing something that they are okay with as well, because you certainly don't want to punish a student because they're easily distracted. That's not what you want to do, but you want to work with that student to really make sure that what they're doing or what you want to do is kind of with their permission as well.
I'm laughing because I just read Brandy's comment. So, okay, the next thing I'd like you to think about is when a task is too difficult for a student. What can we do to reduce that intrinsic load by breaking it down into chunks? Now, I think we're all pretty good at knowing our students and planning activities, and you hit that sweet spot where the challenge is just right, where they're a little bit challenged, but they can do it. But for some students, and I'm thinking of our special populations, what might be just a nice normal intrinsic lift for a lot of kids can be just impossibly heavy for other kids. So what do we do to break that down into chunks? And I'm thinking of our EL population, special ed population, certain individual kids who need some special accommodations. Like for an EL student, just reading the directions sometimes is impossible to them. Okay, so what can we do to break things down to scaffolding them? And again, think tech tools. Think what technology tools allow us to do this.
Oh, I love the virtual manipulatives for math. Yes.
I love that someone mentioned recording directions or video. I think that's one thing from the pandemic I want to take with us. And that was when teachers were pre-recording parts of lessons or directions and posting them on their LMS. Or we even saw some that would put the directions on a QR code for stations and post that QR code at every station. Kids got to that station, and even though the teacher told the directions at the start, they had forgotten. So they just kind of pull out their device, they scan the QR code, and they can listen to the teacher give those directions again. Sometimes it takes multiple swipes, multiple listens. Yes, Loom. Loom is a great tool to use for that same thing. I see some things that we listed for the first strategy being listed again, and I think that's great. Okay, and next one.
So sometimes too much information is presented at once. And this is true for our younger learners, but it's also true for our adult learners, especially if you have stress involved, or that link between emotion and cognition is such that your learners aren't really grasping all of the different variables that you've put in front of them. And I know that many of us, believe wholeheartedly that choice is a great thing for our students. And I believe that too. But I also think too much choice can be overwhelming. And that's true for adults as well as younger learners. So sometimes what we need to do is prioritize the most important information for them. Or sometimes actually what we have to do, is create a clear path for them. So in this specific case, what we want to know are what tech tools help us to kind of limit those choices or create a clearer path for our learners to get to that learning goal. Go ahead and drop that in.
I love the identify a learning path or a swim lane.
I like the swim lane idea.
I hadn't heard that
You
phrase.
got working with track too, right? Color code.
Oh, Lynn, that's a great one. Color code. I even like when the choices are overwhelming, the teachers would just say this or that. They don't give them like 9 choices on a bingo board, but this or that, and then can determine the path.
Ooh, adaptive release settings.
And then the last one, Tammy.
Okay, so then back to what I was saying before. So sometimes too much information is presented at once. And I bet some of you are starting to feel that way tonight. What I'm hoping that Maureen and I did throughout this half hour was really try to prioritize the big ideas. So we talked to you about what MBE was. We talked to you about the big ideas. We talked to you about cognitive load. And now you're able to kind of process that using all the great tech tools you're already using. So in this way, what we did was we prioritized the important information. So when we're doing that for our learners, whether it's adult learners or students, what tech tools are we using to kind of help them prioritize? Go ahead and throw that in. Time release, that's good stuff, absolutely.
You can rename things that have already been listed. A lot of these tech tools meet multiple needs. It's a way to leverage that technology in our classroom and to use it very deliberately. I love the rubric idea, making the rubric available to students.
And I think about, some digital flashcards that we can use with students to help them. And I'm going to give you guys a little spoiler alert here, retrieve some of the important things that they've learned previously.
I think Lynn listing about we use Schoology in Frederick County and to publish and not publish, just to, sometimes when there's too many folders visible to kids, it's just overwhelming. Just let the folders they need to be working on now be visible. So Lynn, thank you for that.
And that's also true when you have too many links or links within links. That can also be very, very stressful and overwhelming. And so thinking about, just even the way your LMS is structured or your folders are structured within your LMS will help you to kind of prioritize the information. Are we creating our folders in our LMS so that what students need right now are going to be more at the top of their course, or is it going to be at the bottom?
These are some great ideas.
Excellent.
Okay.
So let me get where we are here. Here are the links.
No.
Oh, no. And we're doing some retrieval practice. Oh,
You're not going to let them off the hook here.
We're not letting them off the hook here. Okay, so without using any resources. So I want you to put your note sheet away, kind of turn it over so you can't look at it. The whole point of retrieval practice is to have that difficulty. Without using any resources, answer the following questions. And you can go ahead and throw these in the chat if you want. What does MBE stand for? All right. And that one was an easy one. All right, you guys got that one. 2 points.
Built their confidence.
Yep. All right, what are the 3 types of cognitive load?
Even if you can name just one, throw it in that chat.
Ooh, look at them. All
Ooh.
three, all three. All right. Last one, Maureen. What are 2 tech tools or practices that you can refine? And this might be one you need to think about after the webinar tonight. This might be one you need to think about as you're driving to work tomorrow morning, bright and early.
I hear you, Sarah, with that spelling. I always have to double check those.
So now we have links to resources that we've used in this presentation. We would also, Maureen and I, would like to thank you for your time this evening, your engagement, and we hope to see you next month.
Certainly feel free to reach out to us. I've listed both of our emails here, and there is a tiny URL link here, tinyurl.com/MBE-MSET1, because this is the first of our 2-part series, if you wanted access to our slides from this evening.
Tammy, Maureen, we have one last question from the Q&A about digital timers in the classroom, setting a timer to display the amount of time left on a task. What is your thoughts? Does that hurt or help students?
Once again, I think that depends on the student. I think there are certainly some students that could consider that an extraneous load. That could be a distraction sometimes. And I know I've had students who would much prefer to watch the timer go down. Some students are better off getting a reminder, you know, you have 5 minutes to go, or you have 2 minutes to go, or you have 10 minutes to go. So it really is, once again, up to your relationship with that student to kind of feel out which digital tools that you can leverage better. Some students love a digital timer and they prefer it. I think we need to ask the student, get their input, and allow them to be advocates for themselves and maybe gain some agency.
Great.
Any other questions?
Thanks, Linda. Thanks, Lisa.
Lisa Long. She could see me, but I couldn't see her.
Bye, Kelly.
Okay, we're going to wrap this up. Maureen and Tammy, thank you so much for doing this in the first part. Just a reminder that part 2 of this Science of Learning series is going to be on March 9th. There will be an email sent out to everybody to sign up and register for that particular session. And I'm sure that everybody got quite a lot out of this, and we're very happy that you did this, and we appreciate you doing it. So we look forward to our March 9th presentation. And the link to the slide deck is that tiny URL. Could you repeat that tiny URL, please?
tinyurl.com/MBE-MSET1.
And I'll put that into the chat right now.
Oh yeah, I could have done that.
There you go. Hopefully I typed it correctly. Bingo.
And just a quick preview, while we're waiting for our next MBE session that we're really excited about, we will have another webinar on February 23rd on computational thinking tools and strategies in K-8. And we're hosting that with Tinker. And then, as we said, you can join us again on March 9th for the second part of the Science of Learning.
All right, great. Thank you very much, everybody. We appreciate you taking your time out of your busy week to do a little bit of learning with us this evening. And we hope to see you at the next webinar on February 23rd.